Hi, I'm Dr. Beth Molleson.
And I'm Dr. Alyssa Watson.
And thank you all for joining us here in the Veterinary Breakroom. In the break room, we like to chat informally about relevant topics in veterinary medicine. And today we are going to talk all about women in veterinary medicine. This topic came to mind when we saw an article from AHA titled "The State of Women in Vet Med," and they really highlighted a lot of great data about women in veterinary medicine. And it really got us thinking about women in vet med these days. So, Dr. Alyssa, I wanted to start this episode with a bit of a pop quiz question for you, if you're up for it.
I am up for a pop quiz question. What's your question?
Okay. Well, just thinking about women in vet med, it got me wondering when the first woman veterinarian in the U.S. was. So I was curious, if you had to guess a year, what year would you say?
Okay. So I don't know the answer to this question. And oftentimes, when we're getting ready to talk about these things, we make some notes, and I really wanted to look up the answer to look really, really smart. But, and then I thought, am I embarrassed that I don't know the answer to this question? As a woman, should I absolutely know when the first woman veterinarian was? So that's a whole nother rabbit hole that I went down. But I have a pop question for you first, okay? Because this is how I'm going to deduce my answer. Yeah, well, this is how I'm going to deduce my answer. So, do you know when the first class of veterinarians was graduated? When did the profession start out and graduate the first class of veterinarians?
Oh, wait. So when did they first? Are you saying women or just in general?
No, just in general, because that's how I was going to figure out how the first woman graduated.
When was the first vet school and actual graduating class? Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm going to say 1870.
Oh, you're so close. Yeah.
Am I?
Actually, you probably are right. So this is, I went to Iowa State. And so there, one of our claim to fame is that we were the first, state vet school. It was a land grant college. There were some private, veterinary medical programs before, but none of them have remained. They've all, closed. And I think we've even talked about this before. But Iowa State graduated their first class in 1879.
I am pretty close.
Yeah,
to be fair, close. I was able to know the answer to my question and extrapolate from there. Otherwise, I'm honestly not sure what year I would have guessed. Yeah. But anyway,
Oh, that's funny. I wonder when you extrapolated. So I was going to say, okay, if the first class was, 1879, 1880, it had to be at least 20 years before a woman, graduated. But then I was like, maybe I'm being too conservative there. Maybe it was even longer. So let's say I'm going to say the first woman graduated in 1920s or 1930.
Okay, that was pretty close. I think it was more like 1910.
Oh, see,
but
that was
I
earlier.
think your thought process there was spot on. So I found a little bit of varying what should I say, data reports, on who the varying reports on who exactly was the first woman, but I think it's largely appreciated that Dr. Eleanor McGrath, who was born in 1888 and graduated around 1910 from Chicago Veterinary College, was the first woman. So honestly, as I'm thinking through women in vet med, to me, another really interesting statistic that I think you probably know the answer to, Dr. Elizabeth, maybe you can tell our audience, what was the year where the genders flip-flopped, meaning when did it go from majority men as vets to majority women? Do you remember
that? I do know that because, it's in the article that we, kind of used when we were thinking about this topic. And that was 2009, which honestly surprised me. It just surprises me because I'm perpetually living in the early 2000s. I graduated in 2003. And that's where kind of time stopped for me. I feel like I still am there. I know. And so, I was thinking it was later than that. I was thinking that I knew by that point, by the time I had graduated, that, enrollment had been changing, for a few decades, and that we were going to have this flip flop, this massive flip. But I guess I was thinking it was later than 2009.
Really?
I was thinking,
I was
yeah,
thinking it was earlier because
really.
I graduated from Ohio State in 2011. And, my class was, I want to say 85%
Mhm.
female. And so in my mind, I guess the entire profession was already 85% female when in reality, of course, all those vets that graduated before me, a lot of whom were male, were still practicing.
Mhm.
So that's funny. I guess we'll average out and say 2009 sounds about right then.
Yeah,
the,
yeah.
the data
That
must be
is funny.
correct.
That is really funny. Yep.
Um,
So that was 2009. And certainly, like we said, vet schools have been enrolling more women than men for decades, and that trend has continued. So there, just some more statistics for people. In 2025, more than 80% of the class of graduating veterinarians will be female. But one of the things that they highlighted is that even though there are more women vets now, and there are more women vet students, there's also more women technicians, which I think is also just another, kind of important
mhm.
thing to put out there, that this profession truly is female dominated in the workforce, not just at the level of the veterinarian, but also with technicians. And so, but leadership, especially in large organizations and at universities, is still very male dominated. So 75% of veterinary school executives are male. So how do you
Yeah,
feel about that?
absolutely. I know it's interesting because when we think about careers in STEM, so many of them there is just not the female representation, and obviously, like we just discussed, that is not true in veterinary medicine. We have such an such huge representation these days, but the dichotomous statistic is how few, like you said, how few executives and leadership roles are held by women. And I think it is a bit disheartening. And to me, I think it gets into broader issues. I as a mom, and I don't want to make this about moms, it's about all women. But I think as a mom, to me, it has been highlighted in the last 6 years how different the societal expectations are and what it means to be a woman and have a career versus what it means to be a man and have a career. And I think this article gets into it a little bit, but it talks about where does this discrepancy come from? Does it come from a bias in those deciding the leaders? Does it come from these societal biases? Does it come from different goals that women have from careers because of societal pressures? And I think that's kind of my viewpoint is, at least from a personal perspective, I always wanted to be a veterinarian. I also wanted to have kids, and I have always envisioned myself being able to do both. And for me, that meant not always prioritizing my career. So, for years, I have worked part time because I wanted to kind of have that balance. And I think that certainly weighs into it. But what was your impression when you first heard about that discrepancy, that leadership statistic?
Yeah, I think it was discouraging. It's discouraging to hear that. And all of the things that you just said also went through my mind, because while it would be nice to be able to pick these things apart and look at them all
Mhm.
individually, I don't think that's possible. Like, I don't think it's possible to divorce being a woman from, and being a professional woman from the fact that women bear children. And
Mhm.
so, and, a lot of people have looked at that as, a cause for things like the gender wage gap, which this article talks about and which we can talk a little bit about. And, it made me kind of think about it. a lot of people talk about the fact that those childbearing years, and as a mother as well, there's definitely a finite amount of time that you have to bear children. Believe me, I had my second child in my late 30s, and the term advanced maternal age was thrown around like nothing, and I did not feel like I was at advanced age. But that time is limited, and when you look at the time away from the workforce, I mean, the data is very clear that affects wages for the rest of your life. And so, and it's not surprising, right? Time is a resource. We talk about this with, things like compound interest, and trying to express the, how important it is to start saving at a young age. It's one of the things I'm teaching my own kids right now. Like, you have time on your hands, and that is a resource that you will never get back. And so it really isn't surprising, that if you take that time out in the early part of your career or in the middle of your career, that it's really hard to catch up. The same way that if you don't start saving in your IRA, in your 20s, it's really hard to catch up in your 50s.
Yeah, it certainly, all of what you said makes sense. And as I was reading into, this is a little bit of a side tangent, but as I was reading about, that motherhood penalty, as they like to call it, I thought it was interesting. One of the solutions they talked about, which isn't rocket science, but I still found it fascinating, was the idea of emphasis needing to be placed on parental leave rather than maternal leave, which would force, so to speak, fathers to take that same sort of leave, which would cut down on hiring bias. If every person of childbearing age is at risk for taking that leave, and it's not just women, you kind of cancel out that bias. You cancel out, those months missed at work or whatever the case might be. I still don't think that, of course, factors into women who might choose to stay home for a few years, whereas the man might be back after a few months. But I just thought that was an interesting way to look at things, and another vote for increasing parental leave. And of course, it's not just this leadership gap. There also are discrepancies in wages for veterinarians. So I think the statistic was men on average, male vets earn an average of 130,000, female vets roughly 100,000. Those are kind of rough numbers. And a lot of that has been distributed or attributed to men being more likely to be practice owners. But trying to tease out some of that data, I think the conclusion is that that's not the entire story. And one thing I found really interesting was that they say the wage gap is actually, I'll see what you think about this, Alyssa, because I couldn't quite make sense of it in my mind, but said the wage gap is actually larger at the beginning of a veterinarian's career between men and women, which really surprised me, because to me that means it's not all about this practice ownership. But did you find that odd?
Yeah, I was a little confused by that as well. I would have thought that, especially with some of those other factors that we just talked about, women are a little bit more likely to step away for a period, during their early career, or something that gap, would grow.
Looking to protect your canine patients against parasites? Look no further than Simparica Trio, Serraline Moxidectin and Pyrantel chewable tablets. The first chewable to offer triple protection from heartworm disease, ticks and fleas, and roundworms and hookworms. It's also FDA approved to block infections that may cause Lyme disease by killing deer ticks.
Use with caution in dogs with a history of seizures. Serraline belongs to the isoxazoline class, which has been associated with neurologic adverse reactions. The most common side effects were vomiting and diarrhea.
Visit SimparicaTrioDVM.com for full prescribing information.
One thing, just to step back just for a second, because it also talked about, biases, and it made me think about just personal biases too, like what we were talking about with parental leave. In my own family, I'm going to call out my husband a little bit here, and he's a fantastic, wonderful person. He's a teacher, and when we had our first child, I remember that there was we had different expectations about, who would be the person that was primarily responsible for, staying home or covering if the child was sick. And so, yeah, we had that day where we woke up and I was like, oh, the baby has a fever. We're not going to be able to take him to daycare. You need to call in. And he was like, well, I can't call in. It's too late to get a sub. You need to call in. And I'm like, there's no way I can get a relief vet, right? If, and
Right.
my mind had gone straight to financial things. Because again, we're in and it's a little bit different, especially in a corporate setting or someplace that offers some sick leave. But I have never been at a practice that really offered sick leave. I had vacation days, but even then, on a pro-sal model, you can debate whether or not you're actually paid for vacation. Right. We've had that discussion before, and so if I don't work, I don't get paid. Whereas if my husband takes the day off, he has sick days and he has lots of them that he has accrued over his career. And so to me, this was a no-brainer. I'm like, you stay home and you get paid. Why would I stay home? And he did come back with, well, you're the mom. And I was like, we're going to stop this conversation right now.
Nip that in the bud early. Yeah.
And but it just brings to mind that these biases aren't even just in the workforce. They're sometimes in our own relationships and families, and they've been cultivated over generations. And so I think these problems maybe problems is too strong of a word, but like I said, a lot of this data made me discouraged. So I'm going to these are my opinions. I'm going to just tell you my opinion. I was discouraged, and I think there's some problems, and I think we need to look at globally, how we view gender in the workforce and to solve these problems. So sorry about that little tangent.
No, I think the personal experience is always so fascinating because I do think so much of this gets back to just the different societal expectations. Again, not only from others, but societal expectations of ourselves. I mean, my husband and I had a somewhat similar conversation. I remember him saying he always loved that his mom was home when he got home from school. And I had planned to work part-time when we first had kids, which I did for a while. And I think he really liked the idea that, his kids' moms were going to be around and home a lot of the time with the kids. And then I decided that I wanted to start working more because that's just the lifestyle I preferred. And I do feel like there was a little bit of, I don't want to say tension, but just different expectations than what we had discussed, again, because of just that woman, the mom being around, the career taking maybe more of a back seat for women. And I just think that's so pervasive in our culture. And I do think it's changing. But it's interesting to hear us reflect on that in our own lives. And, I think another thing that gets brought up a lot, not just in the veterinary world, but in women's careers in general, is that this wage gap is due to women being less likely to ask for raises and less likely to fight for higher salaries, which have been a lot of studies looking at that. And I think that kind of gets back to that societal expectation, because I have read how that simply isn't the full story, that women indeed studies have shown that women indeed are penalized more frequently when they ask for a raise than when men do. Men are more perceived as that being expected behavior, that being even positive behavior, whereas women, that is seen, I'm kind of paraphrasing, but being seen as being pushier, and you're less likely to get that raise, which is fascinating. And I'm sure may contribute to some degree to the wage gap in veterinary medicine as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly, I have seen multiple things that suggest that assertiveness is deemed a good or a positive quality in a man, and oftentimes assertiveness is deemed a negative quality in a woman. And so, this was not in the article, and I don't think anybody's studied this, but I also wonder with that, when we're talking about pay gap, just in my own, experience again, I also wonder, especially like we said, a lot of veterinarians are paid on a pro-sal model. And so your salary, what you bring in, depends on whether or not clients take your recommendations, okay, and which clients you're scheduled. And a lot of that is out of your control. And so I've always kind of wondered too about whether or not just clients taking the recommendations of a woman versus a man veterinarian can contribute to that wage gap. And I have no idea if it does. It's just something that has always kind of been in the back of my mind, and I've wondered a little bit about.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. When I first read that, Alyssa, I didn't even think of it in that manner. I just thought of it more as a difference in maybe the way people were practicing. I've never thought of it to reflect and wonder if it was because of the client perception of those recommendations. I feel like there's a whole research study that could be done there. So you need to get on that.
Well, yeah, what kind of pushed me in that direction was there was a little bit of a discussion about how a lot of, and again, we're not just talking about veterinary medicine, but how in society in general, a lot of these, workforce, the time that you work, the place that you work, how you work was set up in a male dominated society. And so it was set up for male needs. And so that's kind of what sparked it in my mind, especially with how veterinary medicine our compensation is calculated. So
Yeah,
you're right.
absolutely.
I think we should study it.
We should study it. And I do think, so much of this, I think when you ask veterinarians about the salary gap, I think so many people point to the practice ownership as being kind of the full story. That men, because of all the reasons that we keep going into, are more likely to own practices. And I think this article cited that by the year 2028, females are actually projected to own more private practices than males. So I thought that was very interesting.
I saw that, and that was the one statistic that I was really excited about, because, again, if you have a profession that's dominated by females, it makes sense to me that more females would be practice owners too. And so, however, I will say that I'm concerned about the timing of all of this, especially with, the timing of, we do see just less sole practitioners or private practice ownership in general. And so even though women are climbing as practice owners, practice ownership in general is on the decline, because, of a completely different topic. And maybe we can sit down and have this conversation if we're brave enough one day about corporate and private equity and everything in veterinary medicine. So I was a little bit, that statistic, while encouraging, I'm a little bit worried about even that too. So
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because I do feel like as our, I don't want to say as basically as we get fewer and fewer male vets, because of course we know that the vet students right now are like 87% female. So our male vet population is going to continue to get smaller. It makes me wonder if just the model of female ownership will change as well. I know there are already some companies who have a hybrid model is probably not the right word, but almost more of that individual buy-in into a practice that's still under a corporate umbrella that keeps women, as we discussed, a lot of women don't want to commit to the 60, 80 hours a week or whatever it takes to be a practice owner, that can kind of almost bridge that. So it makes me wonder how, will the model of veterinary medicine continue to change and be more structured to female goals and our societal expectations of females. So much interesting stuff. We will link some of the articles that we read that got our wheels turning for this episode for anyone that's interested in this topic to read more. But great conversation with you, Alyssa. I think we could talk about this for hours more. But I think that brings us to our win of the week wrap up. Do you have any wins to share this week?
Do I? Yes. Yeah. I'm going to keep my win very, very personal this week. So not related to I haven't been in clinic for a little while now. I actually have a shift coming up on Saturday, so I'm excited because I do love clinic and I want to get back in clinic. But just personally, I love my Disney cruises, and so I have been counting down to my next Disney cruise, and it fell to under triple digits. So we're in double digits till my next Disney.
Do you keep a
there's
counter?
A little calendar the Disney Cruise Line has an app. You can log in every day and it spins and
Something tells me there's so much about Disney people that I don't even know about. I might have to see this counter. Well, that is exciting.
It is. I'm so excited.
I'm going to live vicariously through you because that sounds fun. My win, incidentally, is also, I'm going to follow suit. Mine's also about travel. And that is that I survived my family vacation, which is secretly, anyone that listens knows that I secretly want to do complaint of the week versus win of the week. So this is secretly a complaint of the week disguised as a win. And that is, so I don't travel a lot with my children because I feel like it's just, they're 3 and 6. It's chaotic. It's so much work. It's slightly painful. Someone's always sick. It's just like a whole thing. But I was like, I'm going to be fun mom. I'm going to plan a trip for the whole family. I planned it like 9 months ago so we could really look forward to it. 2 days before the trip, one child woke up with influenza A. But because I'm such an optimist, I was like, not going to get us down. We're going to put the family on Tamiflu. We're going to power through. We leave tomorrow. Morning of the trip, the 3-year-old woke up vomiting, not with influenza A, with a different illness. So we still went on the trip simply because the entire car was packed and I was maintaining my optimism. And I won't go into too many details, but actually the influenza A, only the one child got. The stomach bug, however. Oh, my husband got shingles about halfway through the week because shingles started flaring up. My daughter got like a viral myositis post-flu. So there was one day where she couldn't really use her legs. And then by the time we were all heading home, we all had the stomach bug. Well, the first child had recovered. So there were people vomiting in the car, in the Airbnb. So it was a rough week, and I have never been happier to see my home. And my win is going to be that nothing truly tragic happened. We are all alive and well to tell the story. But I can't say you'll be hearing about any more trips coming up from me. So that is why I'm going to live vicariously through you on your Disney cruise, Alyssa.
We had kept in touch during your vacation, and every time you text with an update, I was just cringing. So I'm so glad you're all home finally.
There were not many great updates from that trip, but it also rained a lot. But, not a complainer, so I won't even bring up the weather. Oh, but anyway, well, Alyssa, again, thanks for having this conversation with me, and to our audience, thanks for listening in, and we will catch you all next episode.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for joining us in the Veterinary Breakroom. If you enjoyed today's episode, you can find us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, including a video version on YouTube. While you're there, make sure you subscribe, rate, and review. You can also listen to or watch our podcast episodes on our website at cliniciansbrief.com/podcasts, or drop us a line at podcasts@vetmedics.com. Veterinary Breakroom is a Vetmedics production, produced by Alexis Ussery and co-hosted by Dr. Alyssa Watson and Dr. Beth Molleson.